let's jump right in. We both, Fort Wayne FC and New York Cosmos, are entering USL League One this year as expansion teams. Now, the biggest difference most people know is Fort Wayne FC is not brand new. It's been around for 5 years in USL League Two, playing in lower competition. New York Cosmos has been around again and again. This is the third iteration, I believe, of New York Cosmos coming back.
Third time.
History with New York Cosmos. So it's a new club, but it's not a new club. Talk a little bit about Jerry. I know you got some history with the club growing up, right?
That's correct. So does Jimmy. So Jimmy and I are relatively.
Well, I just say, if this is once in a lifetime, this is the book about the first. We've been breaking it down as Cosmos 1.0, Cosmos 2.0, and now Cosmos 3.0. But that book was about that time in the 70s. But I don't want to steal Jerry's thunder. But Jerry knows more about.
They did it. That book is really, really, really delves into, from day one, unfortunately, to the last day of 1.0. They did a nice documentary with that. Shep Messing, who's legendary with the club, was a goalkeeper 2 different times. He was at the home opener against the Portland Hearts of Pine. But so Jimmy and I are relatively the same age. We kind of caught the Cosmos, if you will, at the tail end. They came on the scene in 1971. They started in Hofstra. And then when they were able to secure, which was a fabulous story, Pele, then they went to Yankee Stadium, and then they eventually went over to Giant Stadium, which is really now where MetLife Stadium is. And the ironic thing was in 1977, when they really peaked, if you will, for that summer, if you will, they were outdrawing the Mets and the Yankees combined.
Wow.
It's crazy. The old Giant Stadium was about, I believe, 78,000-ish. And, the Mets were struggling. The Yankees were having a good year. But, for many, many matches, they actually outdrew both New York baseball teams. Unfortunately, it really came to a crashing halt. Pele retired. They had a very nice tribute match at Giant Stadium. He played one half for Santos, his old club team, and then one half for the Cosmos. And then even after that, they had some good years, soccer ball appearances. And then 84, it really came to a screeching halt. They tried to hang around it for a little bit as an indoor team in the old MISL league, Major Indoor Soccer League. And that kind of faltered. And then they went away. MLS, as you know, came on the scene in 96. That was part of the deal for us hosting the 94 World Cup. And then the Cosmos came back in 2013. And in 2013, that kind of went to 2020. And again, 2013, they came in and they actually won Soccer Bowl the first year in the old at the time, which was it's the now defunct, the second iteration, if you will, of the NASL.
Okay, I was going to ask, yeah.
Yes. So and then they kind of toiled around in various leagues. 2020, they closed up shop, if you will. And then we had on, like Jimmy mentioned, Eric Stover, who is currently the CEO of the Cosmos. He was involved in the Cosmos from 2013 as well. Very instrumental. He used to work for the Red Bulls. He was the president of operations for the Red Bulls. He was very instrumental in building their soccer-specific stadium down in Harrison. And Eric came on. We had a great conversation. At the time, he was like, hey, I'm going to try to talk to you about a project I'm working on, which was the restoration of Hinchliffe Stadium in Paterson, New Jersey. Very historic. He was very instrumental in helping that get restored. That has landmark status. And at the same time, when we had him on the program, like Jimmy mentioned earlier, the project was North Jersey Pro. And all he would say at the time was, we're going to have a professional team, probably going to be in the USL, limited details. We had a great chat. A good portion of the chat was revisiting the previous Cosmos iteration and talking about the work that he was doing with the city of Paterson and the restoration program. And then one day, I'll never forget this. It was like, bang, very little fanfare. Hey, guess who's back? And, now we're back for the third time. The beauty of it is, and Jimmy and I talk about this all the time, we're on a show with you. You're gracious enough to have us on. And I think if you look, we kind of talked about this earlier, there's a lot of naysayers. There's a lot of people, particularly in our area, that don't want to see the club do well.
Yeah, they're playing in New Jersey. Why don't you just call them the Cosmos?
Yeah, there's just a lot of
dead and buried. Why don't you you're reliving Pele? So I do a lot of the social media accounts, and of course we get a lot of fodder sent our way. But anyway, not to cut you off, Terry. So you're on.
Yeah,
you're on a tangent,
and that's the thing. Like our market, it's very unique. Our market, because our market, we already have 2 MLS clubs. We have 3 hockey teams, 2 basketball teams, 2 football NFL teams. Then you have Rutgers football that's getting popular, pretty much. Then you have a lot of college basketball. So our market, we really have a lot going on. And yet I think, what we're going to talk about tonight, we can talk about rosters and we can talk about a lot of different things. But for the Cosmos to return to USL day 1, 2 p.m. kickoff on a not so good day with weather, and to draw 4,100 on day 1 in this market, I think is a major story.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of underestimated when you look at what they're trying to do this time compared to chapter 1 or chapter 2, if you will, like we call it here, is that number one, right off the bat, the USL, the structure of the USL is much, much, much more stable. You have a more successful league. The original NASL, 1971 to 84, it was going too quick, and it just basically
and they outpaced themselves. They're
outpaced themselves,
and a lot of these markets couldn't. But one thing about that, I would say a lot of these markets, the seed was planted then. You look at a Kansas City, you look at like a Houston, you look at some of Tampa Bay. A lot of the seeds were planted back then, and actually, like going back once in a lifetime, a lot of is in the book. But I think like Steve Roth, who was the CEO of Warner Brothers Communications, he saw that 1966 World Cup and he wanted in. He was a big soccer fan and basically really overspent. Everybody else couldn't keep up. But I mean, it was just
also too in conjunction with the spending, the original version, the league had a lot of problems getting it on TV. There was a thing that's really underestimated was a lot of their kickoff times were like middle of the afternoon on like a Sunday.
Right.
So, that was another thing. And then again, which is mind-boggling to think about this in 2026. But back then, when the games were on TV, in the middle of a match, they would take a commercial break.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just, and then the second version of the Cosmos being in that new NASL, that just, it just petered out very quickly, But what I think too is, and I'll swing it back to you. I don't want to hog up all the airtime here. Is the first iteration you have the history with legendary players, but the second iteration I think was important for the club in our area because they faced the Red Bulls twice in the Open Cup. They beat them once in Hofstra. They lost once at Red Bull Arena. They beat New York City twice in the Open Cup. One at Hofstra. One at actually Fordham University. So even though the NASL at that time wasn't really expanding and really had no vision, the Cosmos did make their mark in the Open Cup, and that was exciting. And I think they wrote a book about the first version, the second version. There is a lot of history there for the club. And I'll never forget, like, there was some big moments besides the Open Cup wins, and winning Soccer Bowl, having Marco Senna. I remember, going in the middle of the day to a press conference when they had Raul, legendary Raul. They were able to lure him here. And, they actually had the press conference and they had a whole little thing. I brought my son. I have a great picture with him and Raul. He was little. And of all places, it was in a Buffalo Wild Wings in Manhattan. So, there is. So both chapters, I think, for different reasons, have good history. And now the club announced they were coming back. Jimmy and I put our heads together. We announced that we're having a podcast, and boy, the support has been nothing short of magnificent.
It's been
from the club,
coming.
fellow fans, supporters. Jimmy will tell you the amount of people that contact us.
That's awesome.
I mean, like I said, we had Cosmos fans in UK. Reach out to me. So I think that's just the history of it.
Yeah,
I think we had a 50-year head start than most of the franchises.
for sure.
But I think one thing good about this time, which will be different, I think the USL is a stable league, and also I think in the first two, Cosmos 1.0 and Cosmos 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
They were kind of nomads. Even when they were playing in Giant Stadium, it was kind of like a football stadium. But Yankee Stadium was being done over. They had the Yankee, Mets, Giants, and Jets all playing at Shea Stadium, and so there's really nowhere to play. So I think when Hinchliffe, they have a place they can call their home. So I think that's big.
Yeah, I think that's important. That's something that we have in common, I think, between our clubs is we've got a new stadium being built. You've got a historic stadium.
I saw that. Yeah, that's
renovated.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so I do think that having a place that you don't have to work around another club, you don't have to work around any other scheduling because it's yours, makes a big difference.